I stood in the hallway outside my father's study, holding a manila envelope I hadn't opened yet. I could hear him on the phone inside, laughing, relaxed, the way he only ever was when he thought no one was listening. I pressed my palm flat against the door and felt the wood, cool and solid, and I thought, this is the last time I'll touch this door. Before I get into what happened that morning, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. What's the worst thing a parent can do? Not to your body, not with their fists, but to your sense of who you are? Because I think about that question a lot now. I didn't used to have an answer. I do now. My name doesn't matter as much as the story does, but people who know me call me Nora. I'm 31. I teach second grade at an elementary school 40 minutes from the house I grew up in, and for most of my adult life, that proximity felt like love, like I was choosing family. It took me a long time to understand I was the only one making that choice. My father, I'll call him Dad because that's what I always called him even when he didn't deserve it, built everything he had from nothing. That's the story he told, anyway. He grew up outside of Birmingham, worked construction through his 20s, saved every dollar, and eventually parlayed a small contractor's license into a property management company that, by the time I was in high school, owned 11 residential units across 2 counties. He was proud of that. Loudly, constantly proud. The kind of proud that fills a room and doesn't leave space for anyone else. My brother Marcus was 5 years older than me. He was built like my father, broad-shouldered, easy with a handshake, the kind of man who could walk into a room and have everyone assume he was in charge. My father looked at Marcus the way some people look at their own reflection, with recognition, with relief. He looked at me differently. I was my mother's daughter, he used to say, and he didn't mean it as a compliment. My mother Diane had left when I was 9. Not dramatically, not with a fight I can remember, just gradually and then all at once, the way water recedes before a tide goes out. She moved to Portland, remarried, had 2 kids who are now teenagers I've met exactly 3 times. My father never forgave her for leaving. And somehow, quietly, never directly stated but always present, he never fully forgave me for being hers. I don't want you to think he was cruel in obvious ways. He wasn't. He came to my high school graduation. He paid for 2 years of my college before deciding, the summer before my junior year, that the money would be better invested in a down payment on a rental property he was buying with Marcus. He sat me down and explained it like a business meeting. Said I was smart, said I'd figure it out, said he believed in me, then handed me a single check for $2,000 and closed the folder on the table between us. I took out loans. I finished my degree. I got my teaching certification and my first classroom, and a small apartment I was genuinely proud of. I didn't ask him for anything after that. For 3 years I didn't ask for a single thing. Then my grandmother, his mother, Grandma Ruth, passed away. She died in February, on a Tuesday, the kind of gray winter day that feels like the world has been paused. She was 84 and had been declining for 2 years, so in some ways we had already been grieving her. But she was the one person in my family who made me feel like I belonged in it. She used to save the crossword puzzle for when I visited. She used to say, "Nora, you got your grandfather's eyes and his stubbornness, and those are the 2 best things he ever passed on." I loved her in the way that you love someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. Her house, a 2-bedroom Craftsman on a corner lot in Decatur that she'd owned since 1987, she left to me. I know, I was shocked too. Her will was clear. Her attorney was a woman named Patricia, and she read the relevant section twice because my father asked her to. The property located at 4412 Elmwood Drive is bequeathed in full to my granddaughter Nora. My father sat very still while she read it. Marcus stared at the table. The air in the room changed. Grandma Ruth had never told me she was going to do this, but she had told me, once, about 2 years before she died, that she worried about me, that she thought I didn't have enough underneath me. She'd said, a woman needs something solid, something that's just hers. I had thought she was talking about confidence. Turns out she was talking about property. My father didn't say anything that day at the attorney's office. He shook Patricia's hand, nodded at me, and walked to his car. Marcus didn't look at me at all. For about 3 weeks, things were quiet. I started looking into what it would take to either rent the property or eventually sell. I was a teacher on a public school salary. I needed to think carefully about what made financial sense. I consulted with a real estate attorney. I got the house inspected. I had a locksmith out and had the locks rekeyed in my name. That's when things broke open. My father called me on a Thursday evening. I was grading spelling tests at my kitchen table. He asked if I had changed the locks on Grandma Ruth's house, and I said yes, because it was now my house and that was a normal thing to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need you to understand that property has been in this family for 40 years. I need you to understand what it means, I said. I did understand. I said I was planning to handle it carefully. He said that wasn't good enough. The conversation went on for almost an hour. He told me that Grandma Ruth had been confused in her final years, that he wasn't sure she'd been of sound mind when she'd updated her will 18 months before she died, that the property represented the family's legacy, and and he paused here, chose his words, that I had never really understood what it meant to build something and protect it. I didn't argue, I listened. I said I'd think about it. When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time and looked at the spelling tests and felt something settle in me, something go quiet and certain the way it does right before you make a decision you've been avoiding. I called Patricia the next morning. I asked her if there was any legal basis for a challenge to the will. She said that Grandma Ruth had been evaluated by her physician 6 months before she died and had been found fully competent, and that the will had been witnessed and notarized with no procedural issues. She said, "Nora, this is your property. It was her wish and it is entirely legal." I thanked her and made a note of everything she'd said. 2 weeks after that call, my father invited me to Sunday dinner. I should have known. He only cooked on Sundays when he wanted something. When I got there, Marcus was already at the table. His girlfriend, a woman named Brianna, who had never once looked directly at me in the 3 years they'd been together, was in the kitchen. My father had made pot roast, which had been my grandmother's recipe. That detail hit me somewhere I wasn't expecting. We ate for 20 minutes without anyone saying anything real. Then my father set down his fork and looked at me and said that he'd been thinking about how to handle the property situation, and that he had a proposal. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a quitclaim deed, already drafted. My name at the top, his name below it as the transferee. He'd had it prepared. He sat there in my grandmother's recipe smell and handed me a document that would sign her house over to him, and he was watching me with this expression I recognized from my childhood. Patient, certain, the expression of a man who had never truly considered that I might say no. Marcus was looking at his plate. I picked up the paper, I read it. I set it back down on the table. I said, "No." My father blinked. Just once, slowly, the way he did when something surprised him. I said it again. I said, "No, I'm not signing this, and I'm not going to sign it, because Grandma Ruth left it to me and I intend to respect what she wanted." He said very calmly that I was being selfish. I said I didn't think that was true. He said that I didn't understand what this family had sacrificed. That Grandma Ruth had been living in that house for 40 years, because he had been paying her property taxes since 2014, which I hadn't known, and that he had an equitable interest in the property whether the will said so or not. He said he had already talked to an attorney and that he had options. I said that I had talked to an attorney too. That stopped him for a moment. Then he stood up from the table. He was not a man who raised his voice often, but when he did, it changed the quality of the air in the room. He said that if I walked out of his house without signing that deed, I should not come back. He said that my grandmother had made a mistake. He said that I had always taken from this family without understanding what it meant to give back to it. I felt something in my chest that was not quite pain and not quite calm, something in between, like the moment after you've made a decision and before you felt the consequences. I pushed my chair back from the table. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate, because Grandma Ruth had taught me to do that, and it felt like the right tribute in that moment. I picked up my purse. I looked at Marcus, who was still studying his plate. My father said, "If you walk out that door, we are done. You are done with this family." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike in this driveway, and forgotten my 16th birthday, and paid for 2 years of college like it was a loan, and sat across from me with a quitclaim deed. I thought about Grandma Ruth. I thought about the crossword puzzles and the something solid that's just yours, and the way she had looked at me at Christmas 3 years ago, like she knew something I didn't yet. I said, "Okay, Dad," and I walked out. I sat in my car for about 4 minutes. I wasn't crying. I was thinking about whether I had left my jacket inside. I had a green cardigan I liked, and whether it was worth going back for it. I decided it wasn't. I drove home. That was a Sunday. By Thursday, I had received a certified letter from an attorney representing my father, alleging that Grandma Ruth had lacked testamentary capacity and asserting an equitable interest claim based on the property tax payments. I read it twice, made a copy, and called Patricia. She was not alarmed. She said this kind of challenge happened, that it was not uncommon in estate disputes, and that the bar for proving lack of testamentary capacity was high, particularly with the physician evaluation on record. She said the equitable interest claim was more complicated but not as strong as it sounded. She said I should be prepared for the process to take time. I said I understood. What I didn't tell her was that I had already anticipated this moment. Not because I'm particularly strategic by nature, but because I had grown up in that house, with that man, and I understood something fundamental about him. He did not accept outcomes he hadn't chosen. If Grandma Ruth's decision surprised him, he would look for a way to unmake it. I had known this was coming since the day we sat in Patricia's office and he went still and silent. So I had been quietly building my case for 6 weeks. I had copies of every document Patricia had shared with me. I had a written statement from Grandma Ruth's physician, Dr. Ellison, affirming her capacity. I had, through my own research, discovered something my father didn't know I knew. The property tax payments he'd made since 2014, 8 years of them, were documented as gifts in Grandma Ruth's financial records, not loans, not investments. She had written about this in a letter to her own attorney, which Patricia had in her files and which I had read. Grandma Ruth had been very clear that her son's contributions were welcomed, but that they did not constitute an ownership interest, and that she had chosen her beneficiary deliberately. It took 14 weeks. There were 2 mediation sessions I attended with Patricia. My father came to the first one and was quiet in a way that was worse than shouting. Marcus did not come to either. At the end of the second session, my father's attorney withdrew the challenge. The house at 4412 Elmwood Drive is mine. I've been renting it out for 7 months now. The tenants are a young couple. She's finishing her nursing degree. He works at the distribution center 3 miles away. They pay on time and they planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, which I think Grandma Ruth would have liked. The rental income covers my portion of the mortgage on a condo I bought this spring, with a little left over. I have, for the first time in my life, something solid underneath me. My father has not called me since the mediation ended. Marcus texted me once, in April, to say that he hoped I was doing okay. I stared at that message for a while. I wrote back, "I'm okay, thank you." And then I put my phone down and went back to the stack of reading logs I was grading. I've thought a lot about what I would say to him if I could say anything. To my father. Without any consequence or context or history weighing it down. I've thought about what I would want him to understand. I don't think it's about the house. It was never about the house. Grandma Ruth knew that, I think. She knew it before I did. She left me that property, not because she wanted me to have a legal battle, not because she wanted to cut my father out, but because she wanted me to have proof. Proof that someone in my family had seen me, had thought about my future, had said with something concrete and undeniable, "You are worth providing for." My father fought me for a Craftsman house in Decatur. He spent money on attorneys and time on mediation, and walked out of a room without looking at me, because he could not accept that his mother had given me something he hadn't authorized. What he never seemed to understand was that I would have given him the house. If he had called me the day after the will reading and said, "Nora, I want to talk about what Mama wanted and how we honor that together." If he had treated me like a person at that table instead of an obstacle, I would have found a way to make it work for everyone. I wanted to be in this family. I wanted him to be my father. I still teach 2nd grade. I still drive 40 minutes each way, past the exit for his neighborhood, twice a day. My students are learning to read. Yesterday one of them read me a full page out loud without stopping, without looking up, just her voice moving steadily through every word. And when she finished, she looked at me with this expression of pure astonishment at her own capability. I know that feeling now. I learned it late, the way some things take longer than they should. I never needed the property. I needed a father who thought I was worth fighting for instead of fighting against. But I'm learning. Slowly, imperfectly, in a condo with a mortgage and a rental property, and a classroom full of 7-year-olds who need someone to believe they can do hard things. I'm learning that some of us have to build that certainty ourselves. And it turns out, we can.